There was a man who came to my study many years ago, and I have never forgotten his face. He was successful by every measure the modern world demands. He owned things, he commanded respect, he had built a life that, from the outside, looked like a temple raised to his own competence, and yet when he sat across from me in that quiet room, with a fire crackling between us and the rain pressing softly against the windows, he said something I have heard, in different words, from 1,000 other mouths since. He said, "Doctor, I cannot bear the voice inside my own head." He told me he had begun to dread the moments of silence. He had begun to fear the drive home alone. He had begun to fear his own bed at night, because the moment the world fell quiet, a voice would rise in him, a voice that knew his every weakness, that mocked his every effort, that whispered to him with the precision of a surgeon and the cruelty of an executioner. And he asked me, with tears in his eyes, "Where does this voice come from? Why does it hate me so?" Asterisk. I tell you this story, not because it is unusual, but because it is the most ordinary story of the modern soul. The man you have become spends more time speaking to himself than to any other human being on this earth. From the moment you open your eyes in the morning until the moment sleep takes you, an unbroken stream of words runs through the chambers of your mind. Judgments, comparisons, fears, accusations, rehearsals of conversations that will never happen, replays of moments you cannot undo. And the tragedy is not that you speak to yourself. The tragedy is that you have never once stopped to ask who is speaking. You have never stopped to ask whose voice you have been carrying inside you all these years, mistaking it for your own. Long ago, in the consulting rooms of Zurich, I began to notice something that struck me as strange. My patients would describe their inner voice as if it belonged to them. I told myself, they would say, I felt that I was a failure. Asterisk. But when I listened more carefully, when I asked them to slow down and listen to the actual texture of that voice, something remarkable would emerge. The voice did not sound like them at all. It sounded like a father long since dead. It sounded like a mother who had wounded them in childhood. It sounded like a teacher who had humiliated them, or a lover who had left them, or a culture that had told them they were not enough. The voice they had carried for 30, 40, 50 years, the voice they believed to be their own self, was a chorus of ghosts. And they had been listening to these ghosts as if they were oracles. This was perhaps my first true understanding of what I would later call the autonomous psyche. The mind is not the simple unity that the rational philosophers wished it to be. It is a house with many rooms, and in those rooms live figures we have never properly met, figures we inherited, figures we absorbed, figures we constructed in moments of pain to protect ourselves and then forgot to dismiss. And here begins the darkest game of the unconscious. For these figures, once installed, do not announce themselves. They speak as if they were you. They wear your voice. They use your memories. And they direct your life from behind the curtain, while you, the conscious self, walk forward believing that you chose every step. Now, I want you to understand something carefully. The voice you speak to yourself with is not a small thing. It is not a habit. It is not a personality quirk. The voice you speak to yourself with is the climate of your soul. It is the weather under which everything in you grows or withers. A man may move from city to city, from job to job, from lover to lover, and wonder why his life does not change. But he is carried with him the entire time an inner climate of contempt, and nothing he plants can flourish in that ground. Another man may live in a single small room for 40 years, and his soul may flower like a garden, because the voice he turned upon himself was a voice of patient understanding. The outer life is the echo of the inner conversation. This is psychological law. The alchemists of the medieval world, whose dusty manuscripts I spent years deciphering, understood this in their own symbolic language. They spoke of the prima materia, the base, dark, chaotic substance from which the great work must begin. They wrote that the philosopher's stone could only be made from what was rejected, what was despised, what was thrown into the dunghill of the soul. The very voice that torments you, the very self-image you despise, the very inner darkness from which you flee, is the raw material of your transformation. There is no gold to be made from the parts of yourself you have already polished. The gold is locked in the parts you have refused to look at. But the most surprising part is yet to come, and it is this. Most of what you say to yourself you would never permit another human being to say to you. If a stranger walked up to you on the street and called you a fool, you would defend yourself. If a friend told you every morning that you were ugly, lazy, worthless, that you would never amount to anything, that everyone secretly disliked you, you would end that friendship before the week was out. And yet there is, inside you, a voice that has been delivering precisely these messages, day after day, year after year. And you have not only tolerated it, you have agreed with it. You have called it honesty. You have called it realism. You have mistaken cruelty for clarity. And you have been kneeling before a tyrant in your own house. Consider what this does to a soul over the course of decades. Every time that voice speaks, and you accept its verdict, you place one more stone upon a wall that separates you from yourself. You become afraid of being alone with your own thoughts, because the moment the noise of the world dies down, the inquisitor begins his work. You fill your evenings with screens. You drink to silence the voice. You consume. You scroll. You achieve. You collect, all in the hope of drowning out the inner accuser. And meanwhile, the parts of you that are most alive, most true, most worthy of being heard, sit waiting in the inner chambers, locked away, while the tyrant rules in their place. Modern man searches for freedom in every direction except the one where his prison actually lies. In the old myths, the hero must descend into the underworld. Orpheus goes down for Eurydice. Inanna strips herself of her 7 garments at the 7 gates of the Dark Kingdom. Aeneas must enter the cave with the golden bow in his hand. Christ must descend into hell before he can rise. And what are these descents? In the language of the soul. They are the journey into the inner darkness, the place where the rejected voices live, where the wounded self has been buried, where the parts of you that you have disowned are waiting in the shadows. Asterisk, the mythologies of the world have been trying to tell us this for centuries. You cannot become whole by climbing only upward. The ascent is purchased by the descent. The light is bought with the willingness to enter the darkness, sit down with what lives there, and speak to it. And how do you speak to what lives in your darkness? This is the question that the entire art of inner transformation turns upon. Most people, when they finally do look inward, do so with the eyes of a judge. They go down into their own depths, armed with a list of complaints, prepared to scold, to fix, to correct, to dominate. They are like colonizers entering a foreign land, certain that the natives must be reformed. And of course, nothing changes, because the inner figures retreat further into the shadow. The wounds clench tighter, the symptoms grow stronger. The detail most people overlook hides precisely here. The voice you have been using on yourself is the same voice that wounded you in the first place. You cannot heal a wound with the weapon that made it. Let me tell you what I observed. Over decades of sitting with men and women in the deepest pain a human being can know. The ones who transformed, truly transformed, not merely rearranged their lives, were the ones who learned to speak to themselves the way a wise grandfather speaks to a frightened child. Not indulgently, not falsely, not with the empty flattery of the modern self-help books that tell you to look in the mirror and recite affirmations you do not believe. Something deeper, something older. They learn to address themselves with a kind of grave tenderness, the tone you might use if you found a wounded animal in the forest, or a small child weeping in a corner. They spoke to themselves the way the figure of the wise old man speaks in dreams, slowly, patiently, with a deep respect for the mystery of what they were addressing. This is what I came to call the relationship with the inner self, not the small ego self that organizes your day, but the great self that includes all the figures of your inner kingdom, the wounded child, the angry adolescent, the fearful watcher, the unborn creator, the buried hero, the shadow you have refused to know. To speak to yourself wisely is to remember that you are not a single voice, but a council of voices, and that the way you address them determines whether they will rise into the light of your conscious life or sink further into the cellar, where they will eventually take their revenge through symptoms, illness, broken relationships, and the slow corrosion that the ancients called melancholia. I must say something here about a word that has been deeply misunderstood in our age. The word asterisk love. Asterisk, the modern world has reduced this word to a feeling, a romantic agitation, a chemistry between bodies. But the older traditions understood love as something far more demanding. Love in its proper sense is the willingness to behold something fully and to remain in relationship with it. And what you have done perhaps for most of your life is abandon yourself. You have abandoned the parts of you that did not meet the standard. You have refused to look at the wounded child within you. And so that child has been screaming in the basement of your psyche, and you have been calling that scream depression, anxiety, restlessness, addiction, anything but what it truly is, which is a call to come home. To speak to yourself in the way that transforms a life is to begin, however clumsily, to perform an act of psychological hospitality. When the inner critic rises and begins its old accusations, you do not argue with it. You do not try to silence it. You do not pretend it is not there. You turn toward it the way a host turns toward an unexpected guest, and you ask, "Who are you? Where did you come from? Whose voice are you carrying? What were you trying to protect me from when you first appeared?" Because this is the secret the inner figures will reveal. If you sit with them long enough, every harsh voice inside you was once, in its origin, an attempt to keep you safe. The voice that calls you a fool was perhaps installed by a parent who did not want you to be humiliated by the world. The voice that calls you ugly was perhaps built in childhood as a shield, so that you would not hope too much and be disappointed. Asterisk, what I discovered about this is deeply unsettling. Even your cruelest inner voices are wounded protectors. They are bodyguards who have grown old, half mad, and forgotten the original mission. And no bodyguard ever lays down his weapon because he is shouted at. He lays it down only when he is finally seen, finally thanked, finally relieved of duty. Imagine for a moment what it would mean to live a single day in this manner. You wake in the morning, and before your eyes are fully open, the old voice begins. Asterisk, you did not sleep well. You will fail at what you must do today. You are behind. You are not enough. Asterisk, but today, instead of agreeing, instead of fleeing, instead of forcing a false cheerfulness on top of the dread, you pause. You turn inward. You address the voice not as your master, but as an old companion who has been working overtime for many years. You say silently, Asterisk, I hear you. I know you are frightened. I know you have been carrying something heavy for a long time. You may stay, but you no longer make the decisions in this house. And you rise, and you begin the day. And the voice perhaps does not vanish, but it loses its sovereignty. It becomes one voice among many. And in the space that opens, a different voice begins to speak, quieter, slower, the voice that has been waiting underneath all the noise. The voice of the self. This voice, when you first hear it, will surprise you. It will not flatter you, but neither will it humiliate you. It will speak to you with the calm authority of something that has been alive in you forever and has merely been waiting to be addressed. It will tell you the truth, but the truth told by this voice is not the truth of the inner critic. The critic's truth is a weapon. The self's truth is a mirror. The critic says, Asterisk, you failed and you are nothing. Asterisk. The self says, Asterisk, you failed and now we will learn what this failure has come to teach. The difference is the difference between hell and the long path home. And the strange thing, the thing that no one will tell you until you experience it for yourself, is that the self has been waiting all along. It is not something you build, it is something you uncover. Asterisk, the real turning point begins right here. There is an old image from the alchemical tradition that has stayed with me throughout my life. The alchemist drew a picture of two figures, a king and a queen, meeting in a sacred bath, holding hands, while above them descended a dove of spirit. They called this image the asterisk konongtsu. Asterisk, the inner marriage. The entire purpose of the great work was to bring about this union of the conscious ego with the deeper self, of light with shadow, of self with soul. And what is this union in the practical terms of your daily life? It is a moment when you finally stop speaking to yourself as if you were an anime in your own house and begin to speak to yourself as if you were the most precious thing entrusted to your care. Because that is what you are. You are the one life you have been given to tend. Now consider the spirit of our time and what it has done to the inner conversation of the modern soul. We live in an age that has invented more methods of self-comparison than any age before it. Every screen you look at presents you with a curated image of someone who appears to be living more beautifully, more successfully, more lovably than you. And so the modern inner voice has become not merely critical, but comparative. It does not only say asterisk, you are not enough. It says asterisk, you are not enough compared to them. Asterisk, and the asterisk, them asterisk, is a phantom assembled from 1,000 carefully edited fragments, none of which corresponds to any actual human life. And modern man kneels before this phantom and offers up his own soul as a sacrifice, asking the phantom to permit him to feel that his existence is justified. Modern man has forgotten how to speak to himself with the dignity that befits a human being. He has outsourced his inner conversation to the algorithms and the influencers and the experts. He no longer believes that his own voice, properly attended to, contains a wisdom equal to his life. He has lost the gods, but more terrifyingly, he has lost the ability to speak to the divinity within himself. And nothing in the outer world will heal this. No achievement, no relationship, no purchase, no praise will heal it. It can only be healed when the inner conversation itself is transformed. I want to give you something practical here, but I must give it to you, not as a formula, but as an invitation. When you next find yourself in the grip of the inner accuser, when the old voice rises and begins its work, try this. Do not argue with it. Do not flee from it. Sit with it. And then, very slowly, ask it to take a form. Imagine that the voice is a figure standing in a room of your inner house. What does this figure look like? Is it old? Is it young? Is it the face of someone you once knew? Allow the figure to become visible to your imagination. And then, this is the crucial step. Speak to it, not as a victim addressing an oppressor, but as a host addressing a guest who has overstayed but who came once with a purpose. I call this practice the asterisk active imagination. And I tell you, after a lifetime of clinical practice, that this is no mere fantasy exercise. The inner figures are real in the only sense that matters psychologically. They have effects, they move you, they speak through your moods, they direct your choices. And until you have actually met them, until you have looked them in the face and asked them what they want, they will continue to govern you from beneath the threshold of consciousness. Asterisk until you make the unconscious conscious. It will direct your life and you will call it fate. But now I must speak of the paradox that lies at the heart of all of this. You cannot change the way you speak to yourself by force. You cannot bully yourself into kindness. You cannot punish yourself into compassion. Every attempt to suppress the inner critic only feeds it, because the critic feeds on the very energy of self-attack. The harder you try to silence it, the more strongly it speaks, because you have only confirmed its central message that there is something in you that must be silenced. The way out is not through more force. It is through a turning of the inner gaze, a small, daily, repeated act of orientation in which you choose again and again to address yourself with the voice of the wise companion rather than the voice of the inquisitor. And here is where the descent becomes the ascent. Here is where the asterisk nigro, asterisk the blackening of the alchemists, becomes the asterisk albedo, asterisk the whitening, the dawn after the long night. The very voice that has tormented you, once it has been listened to, once it has been understood as a wounded protector, once it has been given its rightful place as one voice among many, rather than the despot of your soul, that voice becomes something else. It becomes a voice of discernment. The energy that was once used against you is now available to you. The watchfulness that was once cruelty becomes intuition. The shadow does not vanish. The shadow is transformed by being met. I have seen this transformation in patients more times than I can count, though it never happens quickly, and it never happens without dissent. A man who has spent 50 years calling himself worthless cannot, in a single afternoon, learn to speak to himself otherwise. But he can begin. He can take one small step. He can, the next time the old voice rises, pause for a single breath before agreeing with it. He can ask in that pause, asterisk, whose voice is this really? Asterisk. And in the asking, a tiny crack appears in the wall, and through that crack, light begins to enter. Because transformation is the accumulation of 10,000 small refusals to abandon yourself, 10,000 small acts of inner hospitality, 10,000 quiet returns to the voice that was waiting underneath the noise. Hear what I am about to say, for it touches the deepest mystery of the psyche. The way you speak to yourself is not merely a matter of personal happiness. It is a matter of what you transmit into the world. Every human being you encounter is being addressed in some subtle way by the inner conversation you are carrying. The man who has made peace with himself walks differently in a room. The woman who has stopped attacking her own soul speaks with a different voice, even when she says ordinary things. There is a quality of presence that cannot be faked, that emerges only from a soul that has begun the inner reconciliation. And the man who lives in constant inner warfare will project that war outward, no matter how kindly he means to behave. Asterisk, the world you experience is, to a degree, most people will never accept the externalization of the way you speak to yourself. Asterisk. Let me return, in closing, to the man I told you about at the beginning, the one who could not bear the voice inside his own head. He came to me for many months, and the work was slow, and there were times when he despaired. But one evening, late in our work together, he sat down in the chair across from me and was quiet for a long time. And then he said, "Doctor, something strange has happened. I was alone last night, and the voice came as it always does. But this time, I did not flinch. I listened to it. And when it had finished, I said to it, very gently, 'Thank you. You have worked very hard. You may rest now.' And the voice stopped. And in the silence I heard, for the first time in my life, something else. I heard a voice that was kind, and I knew it was my own. Asterisk. He wept then, and so did I, though I was a man not given to tears in my consulting room, because what he had discovered was the rarest thing in this world, the voice of his own self, waiting beneath the long centuries of borrowed cruelty, ready to speak to him at last as a true companion through the remaining days of his life. And I will tell you this, as I sit here now in the quiet of my own evening, the voice he found is also waiting in you. It has been waiting since the day you were born. It has not gone anywhere. It has merely been drowned out by louder voices, voices you mistook for your own. And the work of your life, beneath all the work you think you are doing, is to learn to speak to yourself in such a way that this deeper voice can be heard. Everything else, the achievements, the relationships, the failures, the recoveries, is in some sense the long winding path toward this single inner reconciliation. So I leave you with the question that remains, the question I have been turning toward myself in different forms for the whole of my long life. When you spoke to yourself today, and you did 1,000 times in words you did not even notice, whose voice were you using? Was it the voice of someone who would die for you, or the voice of someone who has been quietly killing you for years? And if the answer disturbs you, do not turn away. Sit with it. Light a small lamp in the dark chamber. Ask the voice to show its face. And then, in the silence that follows, listen for the other voice, the one that has been waiting beneath the noise, the one that has known you all along, the one that speaks not to break you, but to bring you home. That voice is your true companion. That voice is the beginning of everything. And when you find it, you will discover what the old alchemists meant when they wrote, in the strange and beautiful language of their craft, that the gold was always inside the lid. The king was always inside the prisoner. The light was always inside the darkness. You only had to learn how to speak to it.